I'll offer some of the times I've heard that song sing, especially in our larger denominational gatherings, that there will be a little tweak to the song a little ways in, which is also, there is more love right here. There's more joy right here. There's more peace right here. This is also part of that song. I appreciate Dana Lee Simon's story about the salmon, as she says, this idea that we have everything we need to meet within us to meet the life that is before us. We have everything we need within us to meet the life that is before us. It's a reminder to connect to our wholeness. It's an invitation to put away the lie we have swallowed, hook, line, sinker, that we are separate, that we are not enough, that we are not okay in the universal sense. I love that. We have everything we need within us to meet the life that is before us. And I wonder if you believe that. This is not a test, but I wonder to the degree to which you believe that, or do you hear that? I had to ask this myself in the course of putting this together. This moment of talking about trust, trusting in oneself. This came out of the worship meeting the other day. How powerful it is to be talking about trust, how fragile this thing, especially trust in ourselves. So I wonder, when and how did you learn to trust yourself? It's not an absolute measure. There's not a 100% accomplishment of this. We just recognize that from the outset. But in general, when did you learn to trust yourself? Think about that for a sec. Studies show that faith in self most frequently comes from nurturing circumstances. A loving family or adults who affirmed us or saw us. It strikes me, again, how tender this conversation is about trust, about self confidence, about self love, how these senses of self are so established so early on in our lives at such young ages. And especially how often a sense of self is complicated by social expectations, by the neighborhood in which we grow up, by the larger forces of history, by the larger forces of oppression and division. This morning, one of my colleagues shared a video of a little girl on Facebook. Now, as much as social media contributes to low self esteem and social anxiety and a host of other problems, it also can be deeply affirming and help us remember, even whatever age we are, some things that are also true and need to be learned at a very young age. This video that was shared is a conversation between a young African American girl and an adult, I believe is her grandmother. And this girl, I think she was about age 4, it's a close up of her in her car seat, has beautiful curly hair and it's swept up into a couple of puffs and some braids that go with it. And the very front is a big orange bow. It's delightful, it's adorable, it's wonderful. And she loves it. And she is all proud smiles when she recalls a conversation with a boy in her class. A boy named Owen criticizes her hair and says he doesn't like it, calls it crazy. Mm-mm. And the girl responds right back to him, "My mommy made it. If you don't like it, I'll keep it for myself." You don't like it, I'll keep it for myself. And the mother or the grandmother, who's the adult talking, is recording this exchange, and she affirms this little girl. Good girl, baby. I'm so proud of you. You stood up for yourself. That's what matters. What matters is that you like it. It's your hair. And the girl's like, oh my gosh, how many of us have had that kind of encouragement in our lives? When have you had that? How often has it been there? This moment was particularly meaningful for a few reasons. One, just for the sake of that little girl and the adult in her life. And I'm sure they went off and talked to the mom and shared that too. And also probably for Owen, whether he knows it or not, the little boy. It was a beautiful moment of self worth, of self expression. It was a moment of agency, of this girl taking control over her body and how other people saw it. That's powerful by itself. She defined herself well and clearly. This is a moment that is particularly meaningful for women, for example, the emerging woman that she's becoming. For women who have been fighting against the voices telling us how to be, who to be, how to submit, how to focus more on other people's lives than our own first. And this is a moment that is especially powerful for folks who are Black, who are Indigenous, who are people of color, who have been told for centuries that their hair and their bodies and their selves, their existence is not good enough and should be different than how they came into the world. What a moment in just this little conversation with this young child. Because there will be moments in her life, it's pretty much guaranteed. I bet we all know these moments when we haven't always trusted ourselves. We haven't said yes or no when we really needed to, made a different choice, when we needed to speak up about something that was important to us, about a criticism that needed to be addressed, for example, in a piece of work that said, yeah, my work is worthwhile and good, never mind what you say, for example. This is in part where this conversation about trust yourself came from, is how many moments we have known in our lives when we didn't trust ourselves and didn't say something, didn't show up. Now, I will also offer that there are moments maybe when we shouldn't trust ourselves, or maybe the first impulse isn't actually the right choice or the best choice. Because sometimes we're wrong. The offer, sometimes we're wrong, and that's true. But more, so sometimes we're trying to change a habit. I know I've talked about the cookies a lot, but sometimes we're trying not to have the cookies. And so sometimes it's a matter of trusting ourselves to say no to a cookie, even though a lot of us wants to say yes. We want to change something about how we're leading and conducting our lives because we know it will do something better. That's a sense of trust, that acting out of our sense of self and resisting a certain impulse. That's a lot. But also more seriously, for those of us who struggle with addiction and recovery, trusting ourselves is about trusting the potential and the value of who we are, and again, resisting an impulse, resisting a temptation. Being able to do that process and be in recovery and say no because we know it's going to be better and healthier for us in our whole lives, that's a powerful bit of trusting in ourselves as well. So often in messages in our world, we hear things that are contrary to what our minds and hearts might do. Again, we know this with women, we know this with children, we know this with folks who are African American, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We know this with folks who are disabled, with folks who are mentally ill and realize they need help. One of the folks that needs most to be heard and paid attention to are our veterans when they realize something is wrong and I need care so that I am more whole and more able to function. But how so often we are diminished by the people around us. We are told we do not have worth, as Molly Lou was hearing from Ronald in the story, who was criticizing her looks, who was criticizing her teeth, who was criticizing her voice. And what would have happened if her grandmother had not been there saying, "You are, and you are wonderful, and everything you do is fantastic. You are." What if her grandmother had not been there? And if Ronald's voice had been sowing seeds of doubt, had been making her question her worth, wondering what is real and what is not, making her question what she was feeling, what she wanted, and diminished her power as a result. We find this in so many places in our society, so many places in our lives. One of the places that shows up in our society, and more so now, as we're getting better at this conversation, even as we're not necessarily great at addressing this, is the mix of paying attention to self and accessing resources in the question of folks who are neurodivergent of all kinds. One of the running themes of this year is in conversations this year that I've been having, I think, in the church and also in our larger world, is how profoundly people differ in the way they receive information, how profoundly we differ in the way we process information, and how we interact as a result. I'm amazed by the scope of how the human brain works. It is stunning. Let me offer an example of this conversation. One of the most desired signs of life after the worst of the pandemic was how many people were in church, how many people were in the sanctuary, how many people were at coffee hour. And so rising numbers and higher energy were seen as positive signs. And by and large, I would agree. It was so nice to see people. I'm still enjoying the fact that we can just see people again. I'm still there. Many of us in recent years have been in crowded rooms and have kind of enjoyed the energy. Sometimes we struggle a little bit with that energy. I'll tell you, there really is probably a limit to the number of people who can be in fellowship hall and still be able to talk. We haven't found it yet, but I would love that problem. But some of us really can't be in big, loud spaces. Some of us really need quieter, less stimulating spaces, even as much as we want to be around people. For some of us, coffee hour itself is challenging, just quietly sitting and talking at tables. If we can have a big tent for the range of theology within Unitarian Universalism, then we can have a big tent for the range of our brains. You may not know that Jesse Laughlin created a sensory-friendly room in our religious education wing. The light is reduced by there's a little cloud graphic over the light fixture. The walls are mostly free of decoration. And there are quiet spaces to sit on the floor. There's even an egg you can curl up into a pod. So as much as people and a lively energy are indicators of health and abundance and engagement in the congregation, this space that Jesse has created is meant for pausing, is meant to be quieter. And children in classes can choose that space pretty much whenever they want it. And as an adult, I kind of recommend it too. What we create here in our religious education for children and youth, at its core, is a sense of trust in the self. One of the programs we offer is Spirit Play, which is new to the congregation, relatively speaking. Spirit Play is story based, and we provide, at the end of the storyteller provides a few open questions, beginning with, I wonder. If you've heard a lot more, I wonder around here, that's where it's coming from. And those wondering questions are not looking for a specific answer, but there can be many responses. There's no one right answer. And the Spirit Play room, is prepared with options for art and building and creativity, for spiritual reflection, and much more. So after the story, children can choose from any activity in the room. The premise is that children, as human beings, right, have their own existential questions. They have big questions about life and death and purpose and meaning. They may not have the vocabulary that we as adults use, but they have those questions. And so, what we provide is a safe space for exploration. And what the children do with the craft items, with the activity items, even with a story on a given day, even if they've heard the story a particular way before, the story, what they do with those materials might not have anything obvious to do with the story shared. We create a place where children are trusted that they are their own guides in the embrace of a safe space. In Unitarian Universalism, we may or may not talk about God, but we do talk about love and mystery and the universe. So I want to talk a little bit about making these connections between love, which we certainly create with our education program, and trusting yourself and its larger implications and the profound implications it can have in our lives. We need the sense of love and trust in ourselves to survive and to thrive. We need a sense of self-worth. We need faith in who we are. And sometimes saying that can be obvious, but the how is where it gets tricky. And it's not just about us as individuals or us as a congregation, I will say, but also it means a larger sense of presence in the world. There are larger implications. My colleague, the Reverend Scott Alexander, talks about this in his sermon from 2015, May Your Pillow Catch Fire. And he talks about, I know the title wasn't obvious to me either, but that's okay. He talks about why people, he did something of a dive into why people risked their lives to shelter Jews from the Nazis, at grave risk to their own lives and that of their families. And he says, what sociologists generally found is that most of those who bravely hid Jews from Hitler's final solution shared two personal characteristics. First, these were people with a strong sense of self-worth. And secondly, they all had a clear sense of compassionate values learned in childhood. So self-worth, compassion. And he says, first, I think it should not surprise us that these rescuers of humanity shared a sense of personal worth and security. For doesn't it make perfect psychological sense that, generally speaking, one has to feel good about one's own self before one is able to express such goodness toward others? And this, of course, is not a new idea, he says. For well over 2,000 years ago, Jesus framed this enduring gospel of human responsibility and goodness in this way: love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And Jesus seemed to have intuitively understood that love and respect for self is the spiritual prerequisite for love and respect directed outward toward others. In our time, it has been the humanistic psychologists, most notably Abraham Maslow and Eric from, who have asserted that self-esteem and personal security are the starting place for all the healthy and humane human relationships and policies and societies. So trust yourself is well grounded in loving yourself and living in integrity and focused on what matters most, even in the most terrible situations. And this week we saw that sense of self in Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, particularly on Friday. While he was in the Oval Office being bullied by our US president and vice president on the biggest global stage, being pressured to submit in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with power, the Ukrainian president remained focused and grounded in the love of his people and his country, and showed his merit in that critical moment. And what flows from that conversation will matter and will make a difference in our world. In fact, it already has. Everything we can do to love ourselves, to trust ourselves, to be in this moment together makes a difference. On the smallest scale, on the grandest scale, the microcosm and the macrocosm, it is all related, it is all around us. Let me close with a thought from Irish author Brian Doyle. You must trust that you being you, the best possible you, matters somehow. That trying to be an honest and tender parent will echo for centuries through your tribe. That doing your chosen work with creativity and diligence will shiver people far beyond your ken. And that being an alternative and being an attentive and generous friend and citizen will prevent a thread of two of the social fabric from unraveling. And you must do all of this without the certain knowledge that you will never get proper credit for it. And in fact, the vast majority of things you do right will go utterly unmarked. You simply do it one child, one person at a time. And this is what he says, that the small is huge and the tiny is vast. And that is, in fact, the exchange of love and trust in our lives. It is small and huge all at once. So let us go forth. Let's go forth in the spirit of love, in this effort to keep trusting ourselves and model that and do so for others. Let us go forth into greatness within and without. Amen.